It's the Real Ag Issues panel today. We got Kelvin Hepburn, Lindsay Smith, myself, Sean Haney, all of Real Agriculture. But we got a guest here for the second segment. It's Kody Blois. He is Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Carney, and of course coming out of King's Hants out of Nova Scotia. How are we doing today, Kody?
Sean, I'm doing well. Always great to join you and Kelvin and Lindsay, and looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, awesome stuff. Okay, so we you weren't selected to be the Minister of Ag, and there was rumors, floating around that there's bigger plans for Kody Blois. It's now official. You're the Parliamentary Secretary to the PM. What does the Parliamentary Secretary to the PM do?
A great question. That's what most people ask when you first tell them that. I think it's important for listeners first to understand that in the Westminster style in Canada, ministers normally have what's called parliamentary secretary. So all ministers have these, including the prime minister. It's essentially a junior minister portfolio. You work closely with your particular minister to take questions in the House, to be able to maybe manage stakeholders, to be able to represent the minister in question in their activity. So it's to support the minister in question. Each prime minister traditionally has handled this role a little bit differently, and we can get into kind of what the prime minister and I discussed. But essentially, I will be kind of appended to the prime minister's office. I will be there to help to support the prime minister as he sees fit. And look, on the cabinet piece, let me just say, obviously, it was a personal disappointment. These decisions are never easy. I think agriculture has really benefited from having Heath McDonald. He'll be, I think, a very strong champion for the sector. He and I work well. I enjoyed my very brief time in that ministry. Obviously, still close and care to, both the issues relating to the file. But I'm excited to be able to support the government in the role that I've been delineated.
Yeah. Kelvin?
Cody, you've also been appointed co-chair of this new economic growth caucus within your Liberal caucus. Between that and your parliamentary secretary role, how do you see some of these agricultural policies or files that you are very familiar with? How do you see them fitting into your mandates in those roles?
Well, yeah, and I can expand a little bit on kind of, as you can appreciate, the Prime Minister has hit the ground running. The government has had a very ambitious agenda. Prime Minister and I have talked about a few of the areas in which where I can plug in to help support the government's work. One of the things that he's asked me to do is to co-chair, because there is another parliamentary secretary. Her name is Rachel Ben Dayan. She's a Montreal-based member of parliament who was also in the cabinet just recently. We are co-chairing this economic growth caucus. It was started actually a couple of years ago by some business-minded Liberal MPs who wanted to have a forum to be able to engage with CEOs of major Canadian companies and leadership of specific industries to make sure that members of parliament had access to people who know their stuff, right? And the ability to engage on these issues. It was a very successful forum. The Prime Minister himself actually was at one of these sessions about 18 months ago, saw the benefit and said, I want to have one in my name where we can be able to bring in stakeholders. We've already had 5 sessions. We've had Nancy Southern from Alberta, who's the CEO of ATCO, major company in Western Canada. We've had the chief economist from all the major national banks. We've had Tracy Robinson, the CEO from CN, obviously a huge connection on railroad and agriculture. But we've also had Woodfibre LNG, the CEO, which is the largest liquefied natural gas project in Canadian history, also the lowest emitting. And we also had Dan Kelly from CFIB. So it's been a great forum. We'll continue it in the fall. What I'm hoping to also be able to tackle a little bit, Kelvin, is red tape reduction. I'm passionate about regulatory modernization. I think the audience out there, farmers who are, in their truck right now or out on the field, they'll know that sometimes it's the little irritants of the way in which government can reasonably get out of the way, which is most important. Yes, public investment and big billion-dollar programs are nice, but it's also about the red tape reduction. So I'm hoping to support the Prime Minister there. And the last piece I would say is, again, we have Minister McDonald, we have Minister Sidhu, who is our international trade minister, who will help carry some of the exporting commodity files. But if I can plug in and help support them and help support the Prime Minister, we really got to make sure we're supporting our exporting commodities at a time that the world is very uncertain out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Lindsay?
Well, we can maybe at some point, if we have time, dig into the pace at which things are zooming through Parliament right now, which of course is creating some consternation. But more specifically, thinking about this one Canadian economy bill that is moving forward, I'd love to get your thoughts on where you see agriculture fitting into there, because I know a lot of the focus right now is on energy projects and those sorts of things. But this is an industry that works globally for sure, as you know. Where does Canadian agriculture fit in some of these projects in this bill?
Well, Lindsay, just again for your listeners, the One Canadian Economy Bill is also stylized Bill C5, which is before the House. There's two components in this, and it is expected to pass the House of Commons today. It was a piece of legislation that the government expedited to some consternation. To your point, we can get into that, but the government is trying to move quickly because, as I said to David Cochrane on CBC this week on Power and Politics, some elements of the Canadian economy, some areas we can feel kind of comfortable. Things are okay. Why are we moving so fast? But, if you're in an impacted sector right now that are facing duress from US tariffs or markets that are very uncertain because of the global geopolitics, governments need to move. People want government to move faster. This was a change election. Mark Carney was elected to present the change that Canadians were wanting. So the legislation does two things. It removes all federal barriers to interprovincial trade, obviously has significant impacts on agriculture in terms of we have different stratas of agriculture in this country. We have the major exporters that may not touch upon interprovincial trade so much. But if you're a smaller producer in this country who relies upon provincial abattoirs and you're in a situation or a region of the country where you're frustrated, where your inability to be able to have meat processed and then ship it just across a provincial boundary, and you feel that's unreasonable, this is the type of bill that's going to help support those types of outcomes. There's a way to do this without compromising our international trading relationships that we have that are extremely important, so that the interprovincial trade piece, that the federal removal of all barriers is going to pertain to agriculture, absolutely. The other piece is about building major national projects. And to your point, Lindsay, probably more on mining, natural resource, but there may be a big infrastructure play that somehow has a connection to agriculture. Not yet sure, because of course it is enabling legislation to try to expedite the federal approvals around major projects. This has been frankly, a problem. We need to be able to build big projects. What this bill is not about doing, it's not about undermining constitutional rights to Indigenous people. It's not about taking shortcuts on the environment. Yes, the government's still committed there, but it's about taking the multitude of federal regulatory authorities and saying we can't have approvals in two or three spaces, waiting on three or four other agencies for an undue amount of time. We have to streamline that into one process, and that's exactly what this legislation is about.
Yeah, you can still take all those things into consideration, still move forward. It's where it has to be perfect, and each of those streams is where we fall into this trap of nothing happening, because we have to build like this perfect sort of situation where everybody can say, "Yep, I'm 2 thumbs up." It just stalls us out. It would be
the agriculture sector would have some sense on this, Sean. And look, this is step number one. This is the first 3 or 4 weeks of Parliament. Again, just for your listeners, we are committing to reaching our 2% defense target of GDP by the end of this fiscal year. Because again, farmers care about agriculture, but they're Canadian citizens or American citizens. In the case that I know this is a program that touches upon both sides. That's really important. The NATO spending commitment. We're committing to Bill C5. There's also some affordability measures therein. So there's some really good action. The next step, Lindsay and Kelvin and Sean, I think, is moving into the regulatory modernization piece that can touch upon agriculture. We had some really good things in our platform that I know Minister MacDonald is committed to moving on. Economic lens on CFIA, very needed. And again, the work that the folks at CFIA do is extremely important, not taking anything away from that, but we have to be able to put a competitive lens. That's our job as policymakers, is to actually give the tools to our regulatory authorities to consider this as part of their mandate. Same with PMRA. There has to be a balance there. That is something we have to get right, but there's a multitude. We could look at through transport lens. We could look at other types of federal statutes that pertain to agriculture. There's a lot of good work to do. And the ethos of this government is we're here to remove red tape without compromising public policy values, but we got to be more competitive. And agriculture and the farmers that are listening to the show, that's got to be, I hope, music to their ears.
Well, something that's not music to the ears of some members of our audience, others very much so, is the issue of Bill C-202, which is the new version of 282. And a lot of our audience would have been hearing us talking about that over the last couple years. It breezed through the House, breezed through the Senate. I guess a lot of people are concerned on the export side of this that this does compromise our ability to, as a country, to do trade deals going forward. I guess, how do you stand on this one, Kody? Is this something that
Yeah.
you support?
Look, I obviously supported 282. Let me just put this in context because I had some very constructive conversations with the folks from CAFTA, from a number of our exporting commodities, who of course were concerned about this. I think the bill is only so long and is only so strong, frankly, as the political problem is. It is codifying what all political parties were saying during the election, which is that they will protect the integrity of supply management, that we will protect and stand shoulder to shoulder. The supply managed industry is extremely important in this country, but I don't want to see a cleavage in agriculture. It can be both at the same time. Now, there may be skeptics out there that say that that can't be the case, but we have signed trade deals all around this world without giving up supply managed access. We can continue to do so. We can continue to leverage, frankly, the initiatives that matter to the exporting commodities. So yes, C202 moved through. All parliamentarians, not just Liberal or Bloc Québécois, Conservatives as well. And through the Senate, I think the Senate looked at this and said, this is the second time the House has sent this to us. It's not our job to necessarily defy the will of the House of Commons, the elected body. But my focus, Sean, as the PS to the Prime Minister, as I know it'll be for Minister MacDonald and other parliamentarians, is how do we make sure that we advance the initiatives we just talked about? Red tape reduction, focusing on agri-marketing initiatives to make sure we can expand markets, put in an economic lens on CFIA, PMRA. There is a whole host of initiatives, both non-cost and some that would be reasonably costed from a government, that we can be advancing, and I expect we will be advancing in the days ahead to show that balance. At the end of the day, we believe in supply management. We believe in the ability to protect that domestic capacity and that production, but that doesn't preclude us from advancing the interests of the significant exporting commodities that matter is equally across this country as well.
Kelvin, you got another?
Sure. I know this is maybe something peeking behind the curtain a little bit, but Kody, in your new role as a parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister, how much interaction do you actually have with the Prime Minister? We know there were some key meetings that took place this week at the G7 and of course NATO meeting on the horizon as well, meetings with people like Modi from India. There's been some reconnection on the China front, and of course these ongoing talks with the President of the US on a new trade framework or some sort of deal there. Any insight into where those files are at, and again, I guess what your interaction level is with Prime Minister Carney on them?
Yeah, look, I have a weekly meeting alongside Rachel Bendiam, my co-parliamentary secretary, with the Prime Minister. So we get weekly access. I'll be honest, I mean, we have a new chief of staff, a new clerk of the Privy Council coming in. And so the Prime Minister has had major international focuses. He's headed to NATO, as you mentioned. He's got a meeting with the European Council. He had the G7. So there's been a lot of things happening. Marc-Andre Blanchard is the incoming chief of staff for Prime Minister Carney. He brings a ton of private sector experience. He was Canada's ambassador to the UN, and he has been the CEO of McCarthy Tetro. Really, really strong business guy, lots of background as a CEO and as a thinker and someone who has managed organizations. He will be good for this government. He will be good for this Prime Minister. We also have Michael Sabia, who is a former Deputy Minister of Finance. He was most recently the CEO of Hydro-Quebec. He is going to be coming in as the clerk of the Privy Council, so the head civil servant in the country. Those two gentlemen, alongside the Prime Minister, represent, I think, a very business-centric type of government that will be focused on moving issues around economic concern. And I think that should be good news for the agriculture sector. I don't pretend to be sitting down with the Prime Minister when he's having those conversations directly with President Trump. That's not necessarily my purview. But what I would want to highlight to your audience, because I know it's significantly heavy in Western Canada, we know Chinese tariffs are having an impact on canola and pea exports, lobster in my neck of the woods in Atlantic Canada. That's a challenging geopolitical relationship right now, given everything that's happening. But I think what hopefully should give some level of comfort that the Prime Minister is listening and understands is that he has had a conversation with the Premier of China. we are regularizing our communication with the Chinese government, and hopefully there can be a pathway to be able to try to resolve those trade issues that do exist. The fact that Modi was at the G7 represents, again, for exporting commodities, particularly to the Indo-Pacific, I think a really important signal that this government is going to try to be pragmatic in its relationships in the world. The United Arab Emirates, for example, I had a very constructive conversation with the head of their business council, Canada UAE. They want Canadian beef. They want Canadian lobster. They look at Canadian canola as a great opportunity. There's a tremendous market in the Middle East that we should be expanding on, that we need to be making sure we're getting boots on the ground. There is so much market potential out there. I know our industry does a very good job. It's our government's job to create those people-to-people relationships between governments and say, you need more Canada in your life, whether or not that's energy, whether or not that's food, critical minerals. Canada has so much to offer the world, and this Prime Minister and this government's committed to making that happen.
Well, hey, Kody, really appreciate you joining us here today. We've been talking to Kody Blois. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, as well as obviously representing his constituency there in King's Hants in Nova Scotia. Kody, thanks for joining us here on the Real Ag Issues panel.
Thanks, Sean.